Yeah, Paul invited me back from my last call and said when he's on, he wanted to talk to me about how Peter and Paul did not write the letters attributed to them. So I wanted to honor that and listen to what he had to
Okay.
say.
So are you wanting me to just straight up make a case that they didn't? Because that takes whole
Yeah.
hours. Or do you are
Well,
you are you calling to are you calling to defend that they did write them? Or are you wanting to
no,
hear
no,
a
no,
case
I just
against
wanted to
it?
hear, I just wanted to hear what you had.
Okay, then I will keep it. Then I'll try and keep it as brief as possible because I have
Sure.
videos. I was literally attending a whole conference, 10-hour conference this weekend with Bart Ehrman on a lot of these topics, where they were literally. So, for example, the letters of Paul. We talk
Yeah,
about
I didn't want to spoil
13
it for
letters.
myself. I didn't want to come in with a bias.
Yeah, okay. So very
Yeah.
briefly, there's 13 letters of Paul. There's 13 letters in the New Testament that claim to be written by Paul. Hebrews is that weird one where at some point in history some people thought it was, but it doesn't claim to be. So we'll leave that aside. Scholars basically put forth that probably 7 of those are the ones you get most agreement from almost all scholars in this topic, that there's the undisputed letters of Paul, and then the other 6 are are likely not. The arguments for that fall into, and they're very lengthy. Again, entire volumes on each of these. There's stylistic differences, which is very convincing if you read Greek. For people like Seth and myself who do not read, I don't think Seth reads Greek. I don't. The it's, you have to take their word for it. Okay, the style is different, much in the way that if you picked up J.R.R. Tolkien and George R.R. Martin and the Harry Potter books, they're all fantasy books, but because we speak English, we definitely see, oh, these were written by different people. So there's a whole category of arguments there. Some people are convinced, some are not. There's categories of arguments around literary dependence, where clearly the letters that we think are definitely written by Paul, they're all sort of free form and, like written like a guy who might be in prison and doesn't have access to study things. Whereas the other 6 letters copy and paste from the initial letters the way a forger would do. So that's one line of argumentation. Then there's a whole line of argumentation where forged letters copy other forged letters. Second Thessalonians is virtually the same letter as First Thessalonians, except for a chapter about the Antichrist in chapter 2. So anyway, these are all letters where people kind of say, you know what, 6 of these letters of Paul, they sure don't seem the same. Oh, and they also, sorry, and they also have anachronisms, right? Where they are using words like presbyters and other advanced topics that were the later third century church had, second, third century church had, but Paul definitely dying before, they even took over Jerusalem, wouldn't have known about. So those are categories of arguments. And then when it comes to Peter, the categories of arguments kind of go into in Acts 4. Peter is literally declared by the crowd to be an unschooled ordinary man. And the Greek word there, unschooled, literally means unlettered, as in he doesn't know how to write. So then you have to at least posit, well, he was using secretary, something like that. Most scholars believe that the style of First and Second Peter are so different they can't be the same person. So at least one is forged, but they also can contain anachronisms and various things that are. I'm going to try and wrap this up super quick. That things Peter wouldn't have known about in the letters, and the probably the most egregious of all, that he's quoting Paul. And all we know from Paul's authentic writings is that he and Peter did not get along. They didn't agree. They just everything that Paul ever wrote, he didn't like the guy. So they'd be so copacetic in the letters of Peter, it doesn't sound very plausible at all. I don't know how quick that was. That is like the super fast speed run case against the authorship of those 2 things. Do you have any questions about that?
Not any questions. I just thought you had something like, I mean, I guess like you said, you don't have it all the time. I guess I was expecting like something more concrete or something that you had that
Well, you can
I can
you
look
can go
into
to
what
my
you're talking
channel. I
about
have
though.
hour-long
Yeah,
videos on each of these topics if you want to go like
yeah,
get
yeah.
the
Like I said, I just didn't want to
and
come spoiled with like a pre
okay, so
answer to that. I kind of wanted to see what you had.
Okay. Now I understand that a lot of Christians don't find those things compelling. Scholars
Mhm.
absolutely do. My belief or disbelief in Christianity has nothing to do with which letters Paul wrote. Most of the letters that Paul probably didn't write are the ones where he's shitty to women. Like so whatever. It'd be great for society if Christians would give it up because they're some of the worst ones. And I'd also the case against the resurrection doesn't Peter could have wrote every single word of First and Second Peter. Doesn't matter to me, doesn't matter to my case against Christianity. But these are just scholarly curiosities that I'm kind of a fan of. The more potent thing, the more pertinent thing is who wrote the Gospels, right? Because the Gospels are actually the story of Jesus. The epistles, eh, people treat them as they want to treat them. A lot of pastors ignore them. A lot of pastors who want to do terrible things lean on them heavy. That's just an unfortunate side effect, not the root cause.
So you basically you come to this information like as a fan, not as somebody who has like a concrete stance on it. You're more just like, oh, this is interesting. And I thought maybe it was a little bit more something that you knew
No,
or knew
I've
for a
come to
fact or
agree.
something.
I've come to agree with scholars that it's laughable. For the Peter, the First and Second Peter, like is just near universal that Peter did not write First and Second Peter. But I'm just saying there's nothing of weight. You could erase First and Second Peter from the Bible, and Christianity is largely unaffected. So whatever. Um,
This is just my contention or response. I don't want to get too much into it, but even Second Peter 5 through 11 would, if you could erase that, and Christianity would be nothing or the same.
well, what? Why? Remind me what doctrine is in that section.
Basically, adding on to your faith virtue, knowledge, brotherly kindness, godliness, charity.
Yeah,
If you
love your
do these
neighbor.
things, if you don't,
Love your neighbor as
oh, I
yourself
wasn't
would
finished.
still exist, right? Like no, but Jesus love like that's all love your neighbor as yourself stuff. That's just empathy.
Well, verse 9 says if you don't do these things, basically you're not making it to heaven.
Yeah, and Jesus said that too, right? That's what I'm saying. There's not First and Second Peter, as I remember them, and at one point I had them memorized, and I competed for them, and I
Mm,
won my Bible skip tuition by quoting these verses. But you'll forgive
mm.
me if they've in the decades have passed, they've faded. There's nothing. There's no weight. Like there's no single point of anything in First and Second Peter that
Even
is a problem.
and forgive me, I may because I'm a Christian and I obviously love this stuff. First Peter 4:1 and 2, nothing.
How is that? How is that a pillar upon which Christianity sits?
Well, it says that that Christ suffered for us, so likewise in the same mind we suffer in the flesh, so that we no longer sin, so that we live the rest of the life in the
Yeah.
flesh, not to the
So
lust of man, but to the will of
yes,
God.
this is nice. This is nice poetry, but that's not doctrine, right? Like that's not unique doctrine. That is
It's
only that
100%
passage.
doctrine.
No, no, but it's not
That's
doctrine
powerful.
exclusive to that passage. That's what I'm saying.
Okay,
You
I
could
see what you're
take it
saying.
out. You
Yeah,
could
yeah. Okay, so
you
it's
could
not
lift it.
exclusive.
You could
Okay.
lift it out, and Christianity completely survives, right? Like every doctrine exists, and that's
I
why
don't
I'm
know.
saying
When
these
I
are
when I present
curiosities.
you, and you may be right, but when I present First Peter 4:1 and 2 to professing Christians, like people who say, "Oh yeah, I'm a Christian," it's like they almost like cringe at that verse. They don't want it in there because it destroys the whole evangelical Protestant idea of we're always sinners and no one's perfect and all this stuff. It literally obliterates that idea. I think
There's
First Peter 4 1
yeah,
and
but
2 is
but
very
again,
powerful.
Jesus said, "There's no one righteous, no, not one." I mean, so again, these are. I mean, it may
When,
well
when did he
be
say that?
color.
It's a verse.
Do
Let me pull.
you?
I can't remember. There was no one worthy,
But
no,
why do
not
you
one.
call me good? It's like the rabbi. Like, what must I do to be good? Or what? It's roughly
Then
there.
he told them to be
Um,
perfect, give up your possessions and follow me, and then you'll have treasure in heaven. That's how you become
yeah,
perfect.
that's what he's. But I'm just saying the idea that no one is perfect is already existing. Look, now we're in the weeds
What?
about some of this stuff.
Okay.
Not
All right, all right, all
no
right.
no now we're no like
All
no
right.
I
like
just
If
because
you
thought
you
you
go
had
to,
called
something
I
more
just found, I
concrete.
just pulled it up
Yeah.
out of Romans
go ahead.
chapter 3, verse 10. As it is written, none is righteous, no, not one. I mean, the
It was in Romans.
entire atonement story
Yeah, that wasn't Jesus.
is
That was Paul,
uh,
but I hear you. Or maybe
Yeah,
Christ
not
no,
Paul, according
himself.
to
fair enough.
Paul.
Hey, I want you to allow us to finish a sentence. Matthew. The entire atonement
Please.
scenario is based on the fact that we are all sinners worthy of damnation or at least annihilation and have to be atoned for rescue to achieve heaven. The entire atonement on the cross scenario hinges on our unworthiness. So to tell me that Jesus never said it, Jesus was it. The entire Jesus story is an atonement story based on our unworthiness. And whether or not
Sorry.
it says so in First Peter or in any of the Gospels is really beside the point.
Sorry, I meant that the idea that we can't be perfect is completely obliterated by First Peter 4:1 and 2. When the Christians say, "Oh, we're always going to sin, and we're always going to sin, no one's perfect," I'm saying First Peter 4:1 and 2 obliterates that idea.
So let me ask you this:
You
Do
and I are
you?
talking about two different things.
Yes,
You're talking about perfection. I'm talking about unworthiness.
I understand. That's why I made it clear. That's why I made a clarification. But Paul, you were going to say something?
All I was going to say was, you would agree. I think that Christianity hinges entirely on resurrection, right? If Jesus rose from the dead, Christianity's true, no matter how flawed the New Testament is.
Yeah, yeah. If Jesus Christ didn't rise from the dead, then what's the point?
Right. So this is why
Hmm.
when I am now in the big picture, right? I'm outside. I'm an outsider test. I don't care about
Hmm.
the internal little minor squabbles that you're talking about there, about the nuances between the way Seth described it, which is how I understand it, and the way you described it. Don't care. I care about, did Jesus rise from the dead or not?
Hmm.
Nothing in First and Second Peter at all it impacts whether Jesus rose from the dead or not. Similarly, in the 6 letters that are definitely forgeries, in my opinion, definitely forgeries, not written by Paul, none of those impact whether Jesus rose from the dead or not. So when I, as an outsider, am talking about, can you lift these books out or not, I'm still looking for that. Is Christianity true? And there are
Hmm.
Christians who will admit that the New Testament has flaws. There's Christians that will die on a
Hmm.
hill that there's not a single flaw in those books.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But that's not where Seth or I are at. So
Hmm. Yeah,
that,
and
I don't know.
you have
Did
to
you have
forgive
anything
me.
else?
Like I said, it may be that my love for these letters that we were given. Even Peter talks about being an eyewitness to this resurrection. So I would think that
Hey,
would be
He
Matthew,
important
does.
I'm going to
for
move
Peter.
on.
But
Thanks for calling.
Yep.
Appreciate it very
yeah,
much. All right. I mean, he goes right back to
Also,
Peter says, and the entire point was we don't know that Peter said, and then he says, well,
yeah.
it's I may be did he use the word biased because I've fallen in love with these books? That's problematic. When we fall in love
Mm,
with ideas, and this gets us back to identity beliefs, they become branded or grafted onto who we are. And this is one of the reasons it's very challenging to talk to anyone who has an identity belief. And it can be Christianity, it can be Islam, it can be flat earth, all right? It can be an anti vaxxer, which is maybe branded onto their notions of being free or a contrarian or they're not a sheeple or any of these types of things. If you go and you say, well, I fell in love with this idea, then you aren't looking to be right. You are looking to be proven right. You're going to find evidence to make you sound or look right. And so for him to say, "Well, I've really fallen in love with these things," and then to continue to go back to the letter as if being written in that way makes it true is problematic. It's
mm.
interesting that David Fitzgerald, historical research, he has just released a 3-part book series that I want your take on. I'm not going to, you probably haven't read the books, but his take is that not only does he think there was no Jesus, that he was a mythical character, and I don't know. I mean, it could have been a guy that the myth was based on, or it could have been, it could have been based on previous deities. I don't know, whatever. But he submits that Paul may not have even existed either. In volume 2, who's real and who's not in the Bible, find out in God's Imaginary Friends, Judaism and Christianity, when we take a deep dive into the Bible's mix of myth, folklore, and political propaganda. And he gets into Abraham, Moses, Samson, David, Solomon, Jesus, John the Baptist, Paul, and others. Do you think Paul was a real guy? Paulogia?
So, I didn't. I only recently learned that Paul mythicism was a serious thing. So, but I absolutely do, and this is my pragmatic take. Um, a single individual wrote 7 of those. Just it seems from all external things that we can tell about common authorship, a single person wrote 7 of those letters that made it into the New Testament. I understand there's some scholars on the fringe that don't think that, but that's fine. Pragmatically, what are we going to call that? The person who signed those letters all said, "I, Paul, write this letter with my own hand," right? So I'm pragmatically going to say, what sense does it make that there was a single author of those letters calling himself Paul who wasn't Paul? If someone wanted to do that, okay, I guess. But it just seems pragmatically there's a single. Again, just like you and I might agree, hey, was there a Jewish man named Jesus who was crucified? Oh, and that's what, and that's the extent of what we can know about him. Maybe. Okay, sure. There, as far as I can tell, there was a person who wrote 7 letters, and I'm calling that person Paul. So that's
I
that's
love
where I'm
the
at on that one.
Christ was resurrected story when the apologists say, well, of course he was resurrected. I've seen debates. I think Ehrman may have done a debate called "What Do You Believe in the Resurrection?" Somebody did. One of the scholars, counter apologists, whatever. Is it reasonable to believe in the resurrection? And I think one part of the story that always blows my mind is, when Jesus was crucified, the graves of the saints opened up, right? And then when he was resurrected, the saints crawled out of the graves and they paraded through the city of Jerusalem. And not one contemporary historian thought that was news. Like, no,
Nope.
nobody thought, holy shit, there's a whole ton of there's zombies shambling all the dead people that we haven't seen for. They're just walking through, and nobody thought that was worth putting in a history book. I find that fascinating.